I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. We have received and analyzed between 1 and 2,000 reports. Anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace.
Tightly around the hips, and straight look that it should have.
Meteorological or electronic phenomena.
Arm with an...
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You'll excuse the fact that I'm out of
It
breath.
does not contain any pattern of purpose or of consistency.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode, the inaugural episode, if you will, daddy, of Geek Out Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Vinny Marone. Along with my co-host, we have Ange Marie.
What's up, everybody?
And my other co-host, the esteemed Alex Kopec. You might know him as Zombie Alex from the band The Zombie Mafia. What's up, buddy?
Hi.
So, today we're going to take our first deep dive into the world of folklore, urban legends, monstrous mythos, with a study of the Garden State's favorite cryptid, the Jersey Devil. And we just find it apropos because 2/3 of us, at least, are from the Garden State. We're from Jersey, so you're going to get a very heavy dose of New Jersey with the Jersey Devil. Are you guys excited?
Absolutely.
Oh, yes.
You sound it.
That was me excited. You don't want to hear me when I'm bored.
But Alex, how are you today, my friend?
Never better.
So you're going down to Florida later this week to do some cool stuff. What are you going to be up to down there?
Assuming I manage to wake up at 5:30 in the morning Thursday and actually catch my flight, I'll be playing a gig down there with my friend Robbie Bloodshed, and we're being backed by Mr. Jim from the original Misfits, the guy who played on the Static Age album.
That's amazing.
And we have a recording session booked down there after the gig, so I'll be down there for about 5 days and then flying back to New Jersey. Just enough to be down there to really appreciate the nice warm weather and fly back to this cold, miserable, it's called pork roll, not Taylor ham state.
Yeah, we did we filled Ange in at the get-go about the battle of pork roll and Taylor ham, so she is well versed. Ange is actually from New England, so she's not as familiar with all things Jersey like the two of us are, but we'll change that over time for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Alex, you mentioned being backed by one of your heroes pretty much, so like you've gotten to meet a lot of these dudes from the Misfits and other heroes like that. I mean, what's that experience been like for you?
Well, you ever see The Sandlot?
Of course.
I have.
You know the baseball at the end of the movie that's like signed by the entire whatever year Yankees team?
Murderer's Row, absolutely.
Yeah. I've got a Misfits CD that is essentially the Murderer's Row ball. I'm only missing Manny Martinez and Joey Image's autographs on it. And I'm not going to be able to get Joey's because he passed. But if I had, it would have been signed by every original member of the Misfits from, what was it? I think like 77 to 83.
That's awesome. Well, Manny, when you hear this episode, because you will, it's going everywhere. So Manny, hook up with my buddy Alex and sign that CD because he needs it.
But it's been cool. I've played with Jim before. He's a really nice guy. He's a great drummer. I spent about a year playing bass for Bobby Steele and his band, The Undead. So it's just bizarre. Like, you're in high school. I can remember looking at the back of like Earth AD or American Psycho, and these guys are like larger than life cartoon superheroes, and then you wind up opening for them or playing with them.
Yeah, it's a really incredible feeling. And how do you feel about that type of thing, like going and meeting your heroes and stuff like that? Do you ever get a chance to do that kind of stuff?
No, I wish I had. The only story that, I guess close to being a celebrity was Nancy Kerrigan's mother.
Okay.
When I was a child. But she already had like her like pictures and they were signed because she's from around here. Apparently, I didn't know that. And
wait, Nancy,
that's as close as I've gotten.
So, but you didn't meet Nancy Kerrigan herself. You met her
No,
mom.
just her mom.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when I was a kid, my dad would take us to like house shows for wrestling, and our neighbor was security. So he let us go, and we could like watch them walk in, but like they never approached, which I was like wicked disappointed about.
I would
but
be
I had pictures and stuff. But I mean, so nothing as,
I mean, you're New England. You never had any new kids on the block encounters?
No, I know. I'm like mad about that.
No, I went through a similar thing when I got to kind of meet my heroes at some point, and I went on this kind of like a binge of meeting a bunch of people from my childhood, wrestlers included.
Nice.
That's one thing that we share in common. Ange is we're into the whole wrestling thing, or at least we were when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
But it's weird. That old adage of don't meet your heroes, it's kind of true sometimes. Because you find out they're
not as nice.
They're real assholes, but
sometimes, yeah.
But some of them are. One of them, like I met one of the most kind and amazing celebrities I've ever met was Ernie Hudson. And I'm not talking about Alex's cat. I'm talking about Ernie Hudson, the actor who played Winston Zeddemore in Ghostbusters. He was absolutely amazing with my 4-year-old daughter. So, but I will tell you one legend that you don't want to meet, and that's who we're talking about today. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into New Jersey folklore and legend. The Garden State's favorite cryptid, the Jersey Devil. So, Ange, you're not from around here. So do you know anything about the Jersey Devil at all? Or is this kind of your first foray into learning about him?
This is the first time. But, I mean, you guys have a hockey team, right?
We do.
Yeah, we
that's
do.
as far as my education goes on that subject. So.
Well, we're going to talk about that today. We're going to kind of dive deep into the history part of it. This particular subject, we're probably going to stretch out over 2 episodes because and that's one of the cool things about this particular podcast. If you're going to tune in and check us out, we're not only going to talk about the weird stuff and the paranormal part of it and the campfire story aspect, but we're also going to dive deep into histories, and we're going to dive deep into the data that is collected on these types of things, and whether it's cryptids or, things like UAPs, they're called now, which is unidentified aerial phenomena, but most of the world knows them as UFOs. We're going to talk about some of that stuff. We're going to talk about deviations in ancient history, and, there's a lot of different theories around about where we've come from and things like that. Ghost stories, you name it. If it's weird, we're going to talk about it. But the Jersey Devil, he or she, we're not sure exactly what it is. There's a legend that it's a demon, and but the Jersey Devil is a pretty well-known legend throughout American culture in general. But in case you are not familiar as a listener, the Jersey Devil is often described as a monstrous entity, a grossly deformed deer or horse-like creature with heavy hooves, huge leathery wings, and glowing red eyes. All right, so this thing, it's not something that you want to come across. Whispers of the Jersey Devil can be conjured by anything, from campfire stories to roller coasters at Six Flags Great Adventure.
Cut off the wrong car on the parkway, you'll see a Jersey Devil.
Exactly. Now, Alex, have you been to the Six Flags in Jackson?
Oh, yeah. Are you kidding? Of course. I mean, I haven't been in a while, but yeah, I went all the time when I was younger.
I haven't been there in so long. I don't even remember the Jersey Devil roller coaster there. Is that
I don't either.
Yeah, maybe it's something new. We'll have to check it out. Maybe we'll go on a field trip one day. But even the official website of the state of New Jersey, so if you go to nj.gov, they have a published account of the Jersey Devil's origins, if believe it or not. I guess it's not the craziest thing on the official state website because, politicians are crazy enough as it is. But they weigh in on the Jersey Devil's origins with and I quote this, "On a dark and stormy night in 1735, something terrible happened in the Pine Barrens near Leeds Point." And we're going to talk about Leeds Point and that name and how it kind of ties into the legend, but the thunder howled and the wind roared outside. Inside a small house, Mother Leeds was giving birth to her 13th baby, and no one knew for sure exactly what happened, but people had lots of ideas. Mother Leeds said she wanted the baby to be the devil. The baby was born with a tail, wings, and hooves and flew up the chimney. The baby looked normal, but then it changed. That night, the Jersey Devil was born, end quote. So, much like the mysterious years of Bruce Wayne spending time transforming his alter ego into the Batman, the Jersey Devil has had several origin stories, if you will. In addition to the state of New Jersey's official account, another popular origin story stemming from the late 1700s, anti-British sentiment. So, obviously, back in the 1700s, the Americas were just colonies. And back then, there was a lot of anti-British sentiment going on. But they spun the tale of a young American girl who fell in love with a British soldier during the Revolutionary War time. And because of this damn nature of their relationship, legend has it that their love child was born as the Jersey Devil. As it turns out, cautionary tales are always closely tied to local folklore. And along with warning young colonial girls about the risks of falling for King George III's subjects in the 1700s, the anti-gypsy sentiment also spawned a Jersey Devil story. According to legend, a young and pregnant West Jersey girl, and we'll get into explaining that designation of West Jersey in a little bit, who refused to give...
Just don't call it Central Jersey.
Right? I mean, Central Jersey is just as made up as West Jersey, I guess. But a West Jersey girl who refused to give a begging gypsy food was also cursed by the gypsy, thus resulting in the birth of the Jersey Devil. So, Alex, you kind of mentioned that a little bit. Are you familiar with the idea of the fact that we actually were known as West and East Jersey as opposed to North and South Jersey?
I mean, not before you sent me the script for this, I wasn't.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. We were talking with Ange offline, and we were kind of saying how the Battle of Pork Roll and Taylor Ham is a real thing in Jersey. Well, another thing that is real is the Battle of North and South Jersey.
Wow.
So
yeah.
Now,
I mean, I guess I live in what's technically considered North Jersey, but my beliefs align with the South Jersey mentality and ethos. So,
well, I was actually going to ask you where your loyalties lie when it comes to North and South Jersey. So I'm glad that. And see, that's probably why we've been friends for so long, because we both side with the South Jersey side, right?
Yeah, it just makes sense.
Yeah. But we'll go into that a little bit later. But from where you're from, Ange, I mean, do you have anything like that where it's kind of like one side of the train track against the other side?
I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's not anything as in the stuff that you guys got going on there with t-shirts and mugs. And I mean, I don't know.
I mean, I play with a drummer from Rhode Island, and he gets very, very passionate when I tell him he's just from Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. Or if I call him an asshole, he gets very upset.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, yeah. But it's weird because, New England, it's not that it's small, but all the states are just we're always grouped together. Like our states are so close. Like, so I have family in New Hampshire, and that's just like right over the border. And, it's like, I remember I went to a casino in Connecticut and I had a Red Sox shirt, and I'm like, didn't think anything of it. And someone yelled out like, Red Sox suck. And I'm like, but we're in New England. Like, you don't even have a baseball team. And, but I didn't realize that, if you're closer to the Connecticut, New York border, then maybe you're for those baseball teams. Oh, yeah. But like, I literally didn't even think didn't even think about it, wearing it, that I would be like harassed.
People are stupid everywhere.
That's true. Yeah. Especially when it comes to sports. And there's actually a cool factoid. We're going to do a little Did You Know section about the Jersey Devil.
Ooh.
So speaking of North Jersey sports teams like the Yankees haphazardly going up against Red Sox fans, but the NHL's 3-time Stanley Cup champion New Jersey Devils, who I'm not a fan of, I'm a Flyers guy, but the New Jersey Devils, did you know that they didn't originate in Jersey, Alex? Because I was kind of dumbfounded.
No idea. I'm not a sports fan.
Well, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a Devils fan, but I found this really intriguing. The club was actually founded, they were an expansion team called the Kansas City Scouts back in 1974. And they joined the league alongside the Washington Capitals, who are still playing out of D.C. to this day, which is pretty cool. But after just 2 seasons in Kansas City, the Scouts moved to Denver and played under the moniker, which sounds familiar to modern-day sports fans. They were known as the Colorado Rockies. That name was later given, if you follow Major League Baseball, to the baseball team, the Colorado Rockies, that formed back in '93. I remember when that expansion happened. I don't know if you guys remember when the first new baseball teams in forever came into the league, but everybody was buying, Rockies jerseys and everything else back
I had
then.
a helmet.
Yeah, see? So you know what's
Yeah.
up. I mean, purple's a cool color anyway.
That's the only reason why I went with it, to be honest. But I was a child and I was like, ooh, I'm a girl, purple. Okay.
I mean, and cool color. I mean, that's kind of how some of my allegiances fall to, if you have cool colors. So just as a side note, the Colorado Rockies, the hockey team, they also had cool colors. So if you're listening to this and you want to go check it out, go check out the Colorado Rockies hockey team, because their jerseys were pretty sweet. But it wasn't until 1982 that the club found its permanent home in North Jersey. They were first in East Rutherford, and then they moved over to Newark. After being sold to John McMullen, he was a shipping tycoon who also owned Major League Baseball's the Houston Astros ball club. So that's a pretty cool tidbit there.
Are you going to say it's a permanent move? They've moved how many times? I mean, how do we know they're not going to just up and leave Jersey too?
That's true. They could, but they've been here about, I guess, almost 40 years. So we'll give them a little bit
permanent
of the benefit
is in
of the
air
doubt.
quotes too. You could add that.
At that point,
Air
the
quotes.
stuff's unpacked. You're settled in. You're probably not going anywhere, but you never know.
But you never know.
You never know.
That dollar might talk.
This is how you get your, New Mexico isotopes? Albuquerque isotopes.
Oh, man. So if you guys hear it almost sounds like a plane taking off, it's because my computer is converting the recording from the last session, and the fan is just going absolutely crazy. So
you're gonna blow it up.
It might, yeah. I'm hoping
all that amazing content.
All that amazing content of Geek Out down the rabbit hole.
Can we roll back to the folklore stories about the New Jersey Devil? The mother with their 13th child, and then the British and American getting together. I had one question. So you had said, all right, so those are two separate stories. Is that what you're saying?
Those are two separate stories. So there was the story.
So there's more than one about, her first mistake is that it was her 13th child.
Right. Yeah, man, I was going to say, anyone that has 13 not a lucky kids number. Is going to curse the last one.
Yeah, that was mistake number one. I think if that was me, I'd be like, I don't know.
Mistake number one, mistake number 13.
Yeah.
You didn't even go mistake number 12. You just went straight for number 13. So it's like, not just every child
like already an unlucky number. So I'm saying, how... Obviously, there's stories and everything. Are those the two biggest ones, or is that the only two? Is there more, and they just kind of spiral and they get, changed over time? And
well, that's kind of the beauty of this, is that there were multiple stories about this, and the actual history, the stuff that there's actual data of recorded names and recorded accounts of what happened kind of tie into the folklore and how it literally developed over hundreds of years. So when you think about these stories that people kind of sit around and they try to spook one another out if they're camping in the Pine Barrens or whatever, and that it actually has been hundreds of years that these stories have kind of grown from one small thing like the 13th child, or another story about, a revolutionary wartime New Jersey girl falling in love with a British soldier. There's multiple origin stories because it's more like cautionary tales. And it's more
have
about...
you been to the Pine Barrens? That place is creepy as all holy get out in the daylight. You could be telling a story about a fluffy puppy or a guinea pig or something and turn it into nightmare fuel.
Oh, yes. Well, the Pine Barrens will do that to you. And it's funny, I don't want to talk too much shit on the Pine Barrens, but you kind of have to, because
I'm not talking trash. I'm just pointing out it's a creepy area.
Well, it's funny because when Vinny told me the story about what we were going to talk about and stuff, and me not being from around there, he was like, oh, so what do you think about this? And I was like, the only reference I have for things like this is what you hear, what I've watched, what I've read. So the only thing about the Pine Barrens I know is that one episode on The Sopranos when the two two guys get lost in the woods chasing the guy that they thought that they shot, and that's the only thing I know. And so, certain landmarks in New Jersey because of The Sopranos. That's the only reference I have to knowing anything about New Jersey.
Comforting. That was the one source of information on New Jersey that you chose. It's like
murder
this is
and organized crime.
This is what the rest of the country thinks of us, Vinny. I have Dave. Dave's sister went to college. I think she went out to Chicago, and like everyone there was asking her if she knew Snooki and stuff like that.
Oh my gosh! No, I'm not going that far. No.
Well, how do you think my name is Vinny and I'm from Jersey.
Yeah.
What do you think I get? I mean, like,
yeah. You are like the cliche of New Jersey. Mm-hmm.
And that's where like the whole South Jersey and North Jersey divide comes from, because the Sopranos way of life, we're not going to deny that it's not, I'm a South Jersey guy.
We don't know nothing, Vinny.
We don't know nothing. All right. But no, from South Jersey, we're more like, the closer you get to New York City, things just, the hustle and bustle as it is gets much more involved. But like all of that Sopranos stuff, driving down to the Pine Barrens to bury a body, I've heard tell that actually happened. So
yikes.
Kind of some of the stuff I wanted to talk about. Ange and I talked about possibly covering like Jimmy Hoffa and things like that. So I'd love to do that.
You'd have to find him to cover him, Vinny.
That's true. He's already covered somewhere.
He's covered somewhere.
He's covered with about
knows where.
6 feet of earth above him. But yeah, I mean, those guys driving down to the Pine Barrens, real deal. It's a creepy space. So much so that the Pinelands Preservation Alliance, they actually deemed the Jersey Devil the official demon of New Jersey. So only in New Jersey can you get an official state demon. Other states have birds and plants and stuff like that. We get official state demons. So Pinelands Preservation Alliance, they actually do really great work for the fabled and coveted Pinelands and Pine Barrens of South Jersey, with the Alliance mission and purpose listed on their official website as to preserve the Pine Barrens ecosystem, promote wide public engagement in their preservation, and advance acquisition of land and development rights by private and public conservation agencies. So it is really creepy. It's really dense. You can get lost in there really, really fast. But it's really important to the ecosystem of South Jersey. So if you want to learn about the Pinelands Preservation Alliance, you can go to pinelandsalliance.org and learn about that. But even before the Battle of Pork Roll versus Taylor Ham, or the Eagles and the Giants and Jets, or the sprawling, smoggy metropolitan suburbs of New York City versus the sprawling fields of tomatoes and corn of South Jersey, before North and South Jersey were a thing, and we're not even going to mention Central Jersey because that doesn't exist.
It's a myth.
If you pretend you're from Central Jersey, you are a complete liar, and you can tell us all about it. If you want to come on to our Discord channel or any of our other things that we're going to start, you come and tell us about that mythical place of Central Jersey.
Share your delusions, by all means.
Yes. But before that, there was actually East Jersey and West Jersey. So the East Jersey, they were more those Sopranos guys. They were up north. They were by the suburbs of New York City, down all the way down towards Trenton. And then West stood for the southern part. The southern counterpart stretching all the way down to Cape May. So when you hear the designation of West Jersey, because that's where a lot of the tales and a lot of the data will mention West Jersey, we're actually talking about southern New Jersey. They were like two separate settlements of East and West Jersey, and they would eventually be merged into one legal holding by the Empire of Great Britain, formally made into an official British colony under the name New Jersey in 1703. So obviously Jersey, they actually came into English control back in 1664 after the Dutch surrender at Fort Amsterdam, and they were a proprietary colony back then, but they became an official colony of England in 1703. But that invisible divide between the two sections, that exists to this day. So we're going to be covering all kinds of folklore and topics all across the world, hopefully, and talk about some cool stuff. But it's only fitting that since we're from Jersey that we talk about the Jersey Devil.
Well, 2/3 of us.
Yeah, 2/3 of us. So the next part, we're going to talk about all of the mystical properties and fantastical and the paranormal stuff of it. But it's actually deep rooted in real data and real history, and it's got ties to the Quakers. By the term,
All about the politics.
yeah, it's all about the politics, and that's really where this the term the Leeds Devil or the Jersey Devil stems from. We talked about Mother Leeds a little earlier, but the term Quaker, it wasn't intended to be their namesake back in the 16 and 1700s. They were actually called the Society of Friends. So whenever you hear about the Quakers, their actual religious moniker was the Society of Friends and not Quakers.
Somehow I find that more ominous than Quakers.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's too wholesome and too kind. It's like that episode of The Simpsons where Marge's like, there's just something unsettling about a kid flying a kite at night. And Bart's just out there. He goes, hello, mother.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how wholesome the Society of Friends were in a sense because they were known to like walk around the villages completely naked and stuff. So wholesome, it might be, that's a term that we can discuss whether or not it applies, I guess. But they were marginalized like a lot of other creeds. I mean, it happens to this day, unfortunately. So detractors of their culture and their faith, they actually made fun of the members of the Society of Friends a lot. Whether it was because of the naked romping, in the middle of the night or not. The term Quaker was actually a pretty savage burn back in the time. And it derived from the prejudice of members of the colonies. They would say that the Society of Friends, they would dance so fervently to be seen and accepted in the eyes of their god that they quaked. So that's where it came from. Because back then, dancing was seen as a way to get close to God. That was the belief. So the Society of Friends were quaking for God. That's how they got their name, believe it or not. So
I'd prefer dancing. Not that I'm necessarily, super religious or anything, but if my options of getting closer to God were dancing or throwing my money into the collection plate, I'll bust a move.
Oh yeah, I'm all about that. Save a couple bucks and call yourself John Travolta. I'm all about that.
I mean, whatever moves you, it's like how people, when they go to church, they faint, or it's whatever you believe, I would assume, if that's what they thought back then. And
so these Quakers, they have their ties to, to Philadelphia. William Penn, he founded Philly on October 27th, 1682 officially. So, if you're a fan of history, you know that. But Philly wasn't actually established until after the settlement of Burlington in New Jersey, which is a cool little factoid that I found while researching this. And Burlington is where we're going to start the story of the Leeds family and of Mother Leeds, that whole, that part of the fable. We're going to dive into some of the other like competing theories around the Jersey Devil legend, and we're going to go into the true origin of it. But before we do that, I did want to bring up some other notable events in history. So, from the 1680s, we'll flash forward to people got together and formulated a plan to go on an expedition in 1812. And during that expedition, it was claimed that a female devil was shot and killed after crashing through the expeditioner's cabin. So this group of people that got together, they all holed up in a cabin in the middle of the Pine Barrens. And it was said that a female devil or demon had crashed the party. So when that happened,
that's awfully convenient,
right?
Isn't it? I mean, like you go on an expedition to hunt for something, and it just decides of all the cabins and all the woods and all the world, it had to crash through their ceiling.
Oh, yeah.
I've got the Jersey mentality. Show me the body.
Well, they
if you
claim
want the body, you got nothing.
They claim that a claw and a tongue were collected from this event, but you're right, Alex. I mean, like, come on, like you said, what are the chances?
Animals out there that have claws or tongues.
I agree, but that's what happens when these fanatical people who are kind of commissioned by rich and famous people. As a matter of fact, this expedition was commissioned by President James Monroe, so it's one of those things where
politicians even back then were wasting money on pet projects.
They had some extra money to shoot around. They got to go in the woods for a little bit. Like you said, they probably found this poor animal. Hopefully it was already passed on to the next realm. But they took its claw and its tongue and they claimed that it was the female demon. I tried very hard to find the evidence and the data to back this up. But aside from the lore of it, and there's nothing. There's nothing historically to back it up. There is one event, though, that happened about 100 years later that there's tons of data on. And we're going to talk about it actually in the next episode. We're going to dive real deep into it. But it was called Phenomenal Week. It happened in January of 1909. And like I said, we'll go into detail about it in the next episode when we talk about the supernatural aspect of the Jersey Devil. But just so you know, Phenomenal Week has nothing to do with AJ Styles, Ange, unfortunately. I don't know if AJ was he around when you were a fan of wrestling, or did he come afterwards?
He came after.
You missed out. AJ Styles is amazing, but
I've heard that.
Yeah. Maybe one day we'll talk about it.
I certainly hope you're planning on doing an episode. You know, I went to college in Philly, so I heard all the stories. I hope you're doing an episode on the William Penn statue at the top of the building and the urban legends surrounding that.
I am not familiar, so give me a little bit of background on that. What when we dive into that?
What I was told, I went to the University of Sciences in Philadelphia. I mean, people came from all over, obviously, but I had a girlfriend that was from Philly or just outside of Philly. And from what I remember of this legend, they have the statue of William Penn on top of one of the buildings there. And supposedly, as long as no buildings ever surpassed his height, everything was cool. And then, you know, obviously there's much taller buildings in Philly. Now you get the skyline when you come in on the SEPTA train. Supposedly at like midnight, the statue comes to life and comes down and dances in the street or some other mumbo jumbo like that.
He was quaking.
Yeah,
there you go.
That was perfect. Yeah, you're right. Maybe he just couldn't give up his quaking ways. I mean, he was the OG Quaker of Philly, right? So I've heard of the curse of William Penn's statue, but know that
what's the curse of it?
Well, it's kind of similar to the curse of the Bambino that I'm sure Ange is very familiar with as a Red Sox fan.
Facts.
Yeah, it has to do with the statue. Now, I don't know the details, so I'm sure that if somebody listens to this and they hear it and it's wrong, they're going to roast me on it, but it has something to do with the statue being erected, and from that point on, you know, no Phillies sports team was ever able to win a championship, you know, because we all know how immensely important to the survival of our species that winning sports championships is.
I've been told Gritty comes for you in the night, so...
Well, you know what? I wouldn't put it past Gritty. He's probably the one that destroyed the curse, because you just don't fuck with Gritty.
He is now the curse being in the Philadelphia area. All other curses, demons, monsters bow down in homage to him, because that thing is pure nightmare fuel.
Yes, you just don't fuck with Gritty. He is the embodiment of Philadelphia, and I'm proud to say that.
I would agree to that wholeheartedly, but I think we have two different meanings.
He is hideous to look at. Gritty is. But even more hideous, I want to talk about that happened about 100 years after that Phenomenal Week that we just mentioned. There was the story of the Montauk Monster, and it happened on July 12th of 2008 in Montauk, New York, right on the beach there. It's about 175 miles away from the New Jersey Pine Barrens, is where, you know, obviously where a lot of the stuff we're talking about takes place today. But I'm actually going to put an image of the Montauk Monster. We have a little chat going on for our, for our hosts in the episode. I'm going to put an image of this monster, and I want the two of you to take a look at it and tell me what you think, and kind of describe it for our listeners.
Looks like a dead, shaved animal. I'm not quite sure what type.
I mean, it definitely looks like a dog, or in the dog family.
Yeah, definitely in the family. I don't know if I'd say it's a dog because of the jawline and the snout, but I mean, definitely in like the dog wild boarish kind of family.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does kind of. It's built like a boar, like you said, Alex, and it's got really sharp
face,
teeth.
Yeah, Mm-hmm.
And you can still see some of where hair was on its body. I mean, it's not pretty, bottom line.
Well, needless to say, there's a lot of competing theories on what this thing is. There's a lot of people who claim that the Montauk monster is the Jersey Devil or part of the Jersey Devil family. All right, but there's a couple of competing theories on what this thing actually is and was. So, a guy named William Wise, he was the director of Stony Brook University's Living Marine Resources Institute. That's a mouthful to say. He said that the corpse was fake. So it's not even a real animal of any sort. But if he had to guess if it was an actual animal at some point, his next best guess was that it was a diseased dog or coyote whose body was deteriorated by its time in the sea, because this was found washed up on a beach.
That'll do it.
Another theory is paleozoologist Darren Naish studied the photograph. Now, that's all that we have, by the way. The body itself was never recovered and tested. But he studied the photograph and concluded from the corpse's visible definition, the skull shape, the front paws, that the creature was actually a raccoon in his mind.
That's a really big raccoon.
Yeah,
right?
I say that's awful big to be a raccoon.
But yeah, with its extremely odd appearance, merely being a byproduct of the decomposition and the water reaction with removing most of the animal's hair and some of its flesh and things like that.
And you said this was 2008?
This was in 2008, yeah.
I mean, where's the Jersey mentality? Where's the body? What happened to the body?
It's with Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And then there's another...
Because you could always say that people were doing it to get but like social media, I don't know how it was back in 2008, but was it just placed there and photo was taken and then it just spread like wildfire on the internet just to get likes and stuff like that? It makes you wonder, because like you said, these people just studied the pictures.
Right.
You know, anybody can have an opinion looking at a picture, whether you have a degree or not, or,
Gotta love Photoshop, just saying.
Oh, that's another thing. Like, what if somebody Photoshopped it and, So
the photo I sent you guys to look at, it was taken by Christina Pampalone and her boyfriend, Ryan. They were walking along the surf that day in July when they came across this corpse. Now, it can be argued, if this was the only person or the only couple that found this corpse and took photos of it, that it was photoshopped or that it was kind of staged. I don't know how big social media itself. I think MySpace was still like the main social media source back then.
Well, not like it is now that people would put things fake in there just to get like stuff trending, was my point.
Right.
Like, I didn't know how some people did do that with photos. And like I said, I don't know back then, but now it would seem more likely that something like this would happen now than versus 2008.
Yeah. I mean, it very well could be. Christina and these other folks that found this thing or claim to have found this thing, they very well could have concocted the whole story.
So did they just leave it after they took the photos and then the waves came and took them back home, or like...
That's something I wasn't able to find. I wasn't able to find whether or not...
Because if that was me, I would have called like the police and said, hey, we got something going on down at this beach.
What the hell is this?
Yeah.
We got the Jersey Devil on the beach over here.
About that.
Well, I don't know how much it has to do with this, with the other theory, but there is a theory about Plum Island Animal Disease Center, which is about 18 miles from Montauk, which is where this was found. So maybe this has something to do with it. I don't know if the body could have been secretly taken away, or maybe people kind of shied the people who found it away from it. But this particular animal disease center, it's got an infamous nickname of Monster Island, and the locals call it that. They claim the facility was used as a laboratory to concoct biological weapons, such as man-made diseases and mutations during the Cold War era. This claim has been refuted many times by both government officials and directors at the facility alike. But, as we know, it doesn't stop a good myth from turning into an urban legend. So to your point, Ange, I mean, if Plum Island Animal Disease Center, if this was something that came from there, I would imagine that they would want to come and get this thing off the beach and out of the public eye before anyone else could see it.
And they just probably Men in Blacked everybody and, erased their memories. Oh, you didn't see nothing. That was nothing. Just remind me never to go to that beach and swim in there.
It's a raccoon that was eroded by seawater.
Yeah. Like I said, that's a really big raccoon if we're talking about
Yeah,
that.
man. I mean,
Well, funny enough, around that same time, I encountered a raccoon myself that was about as big. I was driving down the street one day.
I am never coming to visit you guys. Okay. I've heard
yeah,
so many
you'd be
negative
wise not
things
to.
about your state right now that I'm like, I don't think I'm going to go there.
Yeah, I was driving down the street one day. I was in a neighborhood. I wasn't going super fast, maybe 20 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour. And all of a sudden I see a raccoon crossing the street. And at first I didn't think it was a raccoon because it was so big. It looked like a little cub or like a medium-sized bear. So I stop in front of it and I'm waiting for it to cross and it stops there. And I'm like, all right, come on, any day now. Minute goes by and I start honking at the thing because I'm like, come on, man, I got to get wherever I was going to work or something. And all of a sudden the thing just stands up on its hind legs and puts its arms stretched out way in the air and hisses at me and makes whatever
So it
sound.
was
And
basically saying, come at me.
it's like, come at me, bro. But yeah, it's
Was this during the day?
this was during the day. Yeah, so I did not want to fuck with that raccoon.
That's probably not a good sign. I mean, raccoons are nocturnal. They seriously, if you see one out during the day, that probably means there was something wrong with it.
You're in trouble.
No, I agree. So I did not want anything to do with with that thing.
Wait,
I
so
just let him move
How long
along.
ago was this?
This was probably around the same time back in. So my oldest daughter was 1 at the time. So back in 05 or 06, somewhere around there.
And you didn't have a cell phone camera back then?
No, I was kind of late to the cell phone game. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, me too.
You know, I didn't have like a smartphone. I didn't have a smartphone until 2014, 2015. So
Probably around the time I had one too.
I had a flip phone or like the Nokia, where you had to like, in order to type an S, you had to hit like, the 7 like 4 times or whatever.
Yep.
Once I got the smartphone, it was like game over. But
Yeah.
it was just so I didn't have a camera on me at the time.
Oh, okay. Because I was just gonna say, if that was me, I'd be like paparazzi the thing, and then the thing like attacks the camera and everything. But maybe it was a pregnant raccoon. Maybe that was why it was so defensive.
Either that or
Hormonal and friggin' rabbit at the same time.
either that or it was just an asshole.
I mean, it is New
But I'd
Jersey.
be like, what are you feeding these things down there? Like, seriously.
I have one thing I do have a picture of. I'll have to show you guys offline because I have to find it. But I've had raccoons like show up at my house in the middle of the night. So I'll like look out my back window and we have like this big porch back there, and a couple of times I've seen not as big of a raccoon, but they're pretty large, and then they look at you like you just like you're encroaching on their turf. They're like, well, what the fuck are you doing bothering me at 2 a.m.? And I'm asking them the same thing. It's like, look, man, I'm trying to sleep.
You just want some pizza.
Well, he's not getting it from me, that's for damn
Don't
sure.
we all? That thing is no raccoon, dude. That thing's way too big to be a raccoon.
That looks like a pit bull had sex with a pig, like one of those pigs.
Warthog.
Warthog, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, if Kim Kardashian's dating Pete Davidson, anything's possible.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Did you
so
see that?
Dysfunctional.
Did you see that meme going around as like
the Beetlejuice one?
Yes. Oh my god, it's
Yes.
perfect.
That's friggin' hilarious.
It's like, I'd imagine this is what Beetlejuice looked like when he was alive. I'm like, yeah, pretty much. It sounds about right.
What was that one where he had that military guy on Weekend Update and he just told him he looked like living meth?
Oh
That
gosh.
was like the perfect. I was like, yeah, I don't use the phrase nail on the head very often, but there you go.
All right. So I'd mentioned that the photographer here, her name was Christina Pampalone. Her boyfriend Ryan, they were walking along the surf one day. They came across this unusual looking corpse. So she, stole his digital camera that they had. I guess they were going to try to take some nice couple pictures by the beach there. So it's a good thing they had it. And you could actually find interviews of Christina. She's gone on the record. She shared her theory that this thing could be a byproduct of Plum Island biological experiments. just because there's always whispers and rumors and stuff about the government conspiracy and the machinations of mad scientists.
Let's not overlook the fact that nature is a cruel system, and even if we take the toxic sludge out of it, birth defects happen in animals.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this could be the creature from the toxic waste dump. This could just be some unlucky animal that, nature put in a cruel set of circumstances.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. And Christina herself even said it could be much more ordinary explanation, something to that effect, Alex, where it could just be this poor thing kind of had seen better days, or maybe it never saw a good day, and this was kind of the byproduct of it. But if you were to talk to Dr. Larry Barrett, he's actually the veterinarian and director of Plum Island Disease Center, Monster Island, if you will. He affirms that his laboratories, they haven't done top secret work since the 1950s. So that kind of stuff has been long gone for generations. And that all the local myths and rumors that constantly fuel speculation around what Plum Island Animal Disease Center actually is responsible for, all they're worried about doing is finding treatments and cures for common things. And they're mostly cattle-derived diseases like hand, foot, and mouth disease. Very common things like that. It's nothing that's of top secret nature. So Dr. Barrett was asked what his opinion was on this creature, and by looking at Christina's photo, he said kind of what you had mentioned a little earlier, that it was a skinned animal, like a raccoon or a dog or a cat. And then with those additional photos from those other eyewitnesses, Dr. Barrett used his expertise to identify the corpse as a bulldog or a boxer, which is pretty sad. Pretty sad looking at this thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, if one of us got thrown into the ocean for God knows how long, I'm sure we wouldn't be viewed as our Sunday finest if we washed ashore.
That's true. Yeah, we'd be a little worse for the wear. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like we mentioned earlier, there's no other records that exist on this. So after the corpse was photographed, no one knows what happened to it. And even if someone did get a hold of this thing, or if they are holding it, if genetic testing was properly carried out, that could cost anywhere from a few hundred up to a couple $1,000s anyway. So you'd really have to get someone who was invested in this and proving what the Montauk monster was in order for them to really go through with it. So whether or not it's the Jersey Devil or a lab experiment going wrong, or just maybe someone was done something terrible to an animal, we'll never know. That's the mystery of it.
I just think that, with things, it depends on like what generation you're in, because if you look back in like the 30s, how they had like the freak show and the oddities, like fast forward nowadays, they're so easily explained because of DNA and other testing that can be done. So like Alex said, it could be as simple as like a birth defect, but they put something in a jar back then and charged people to stare at it. And it was like, everything was so believable back then because of how they drummed it up, and how like freak shows were so like, the main thing at like carnivals and everything.
The fact that there was no body to be to be tested or even to be looked at, just because there's so many cases where these types of things come up nowadays, and people are either they're called out on the carpet for being full of shit, or you find something that's really cool and it kind of inspires looking into something else, maybe like a different type of genetics testing, or mutations that could help and benefit the species that you find the mutation in. How things have changed over even just the last 10-15 years, and this kind of collective state of mind that we're all communicating with one another together, that I can just take this photo and send it to you guys while we're having a conversation, in and of itself is pretty amazing. So I agree. It sucks.
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Damn right. That's kind of the cool part about this, and why there's so many different versions of this story and this tale of the Jersey Devil. So I kind of want to go into the true origin of the legend, and I say true kind of in quotations there because the title itself is a little deceiving, and you'll kind of see as we move along as to why. Because
is this the Daniel Leeds story?
This is the Daniel Leeds story. So before we jump into that,
Vinny, if we can drum up enough more episodes where we use the phrase "Where's the body," you could have T-shirts made.
That's true.
Oh my gosh.
Just saying.
I mean, we did talk about doing a whole series on the mafia, so
Oh yeah.
that could just be that could be our catchphrase. Where's the body?
You could monetize the podcast, sell T-shirts.
Hell yeah.
It's hard being from here. Try being from Jersey.
I don't know, man. Crazy raccoons and pork rolls. I don't know. I mean, it's a little overwhelming.
Crazy raccoons and pork rolls. We're all about.
That could be another T-shirt, Vinny, right there. They practically sell themselves.
See, Ange, I knew I asked you to be a part of this for a reason. You just came up with two of our exclusive items for the podcast.
Oh, the Quakering. Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah.
We're going to tell the true origin story of the legend that is the Jersey Devil. And I think I mentioned this yesterday, but I'm going to say it over again. The title of this is admittedly a little deceiving because this story, the story of the Jersey Devil, you'll see it's kind of an amalgamation of two different things. But over the last, I want to say 250 to 300 years, these two different things have merged into one. And it's all thanks to kind of pinpointing the Leeds Devil. And we're going to get into that. So I read this great book by authors Frank Esposito and Brian Regal. They did a really amazing job collecting some relevant and factual data in regards to the origin of this particular legend. Regal himself, he posits that the myth as we know it today, as I just mentioned, is a tale of two demons, the Jersey Devil and the Leeds Devil. And Regal was quoted, I was listening to one of his interviews, there's a woman named Liz Covert. She does a podcast, it's called Ben Franklin's World, and you'll see where he ties into it soon. But Regal was quoted on that podcast as saying, there would be no Jersey Devil without the Leeds Devil, and there would be no Leeds Devil without Daniel Leeds. So the current myth, complete with a physical interpretation of the monster, the one that we talked about, the beast that is a cross between a deer and a gaunt horse with giant wings, that didn't exist in the zeitgeist as we know it until around the late 1860s. So according to Regal and Esposito in their book, the Jersey Devil before that was more of a political animal, at least in namesake. It was a moniker bestowed upon Daniel Leeds and then later to his son Titan Leeds for siding with imperial Great Britain during the time that the seeds of the colonial revolution began to take root in the late 1600s and early 1700s. So with none other than American history's version of Austin Powers' Faja himself, Ben Franklin, driving the death knell into the Leeds family legacy. That's where he's going to tie in here, and you're going to see that. It's kind of funny, and it's also kind of sad, but the way that it plays out is it was like a public execution of the Leeds family reputation. Let's just put it that way. So first we're going to talk about Daniel Leeds, who he was, why he was important. I don't want to downplay his importance in society, in Burlington, in West Jersey as a whole. He was actually a really important figure at the time. He was very well educated, very well read. So his downfall was significant. And when he had this downfall, when his reputation took this big hit, it was big enough to spawn a folktale that has lasted literally hundreds of years. So I don't know if this reminds the two of you of anything. Can you think of any other person maybe in modern times where, their downfall or maybe a misstep in what they've done in their life has kind of spawned a legend or a folktale at all?
I mean, we suffer from being in an age where there's a scandal every 5 minutes with the internet. So
Right.
To me, at least, the attention span just isn't there in the general public because, someone will do something, it'll be shock and horror, and then they move on to the next thing.
Yeah, the only two that I could really think of, well, actually now there's kind of three. Pop culture wise, you have Marilyn Monroe, where her downfall has caused a bunch of conspiracy theories around it. They haven't necessarily created, a monstrous figure or the ghost of Marilyn Monroe haunting things, but it definitely caused a bunch of conspiracies around it. You have like Elvis, right? And then most recently, Michael Jackson. His life, even when he was still alive, you know, he was chastised and damned. And
See, I'd agree with Michael Jackson. I don't know if I would agree with Elvis and Marilyn, just because while there are conspiracy theories out there, I don't know that I would say Elvis and Marilyn got demonized. Michael Jackson absolutely did. And I would say he's a perfect example, but I don't know if I'd agree with Elvis and Marilyn.
that's a very good point. Yeah, you're right. That whole idea of demonization. Yeah, you're right. If you're taking it to that next level.
Elvis and Marilyn are still idolized, and Michael Jackson is too, to a certain extent. But Marilyn and Elvis, when they die, well, actually, I mean, I guess maybe Elvis would probably qualify because there was all that outrage about him when he first started. Like when he was on Ed Sullivan, they wouldn't show him from the waist down because of the way he shakes. So I guess Elvis.
I guess you could say he shook like a Quaker.
Yeah, there you go.
He brought Quaking back. Well, Daniel Leeds himself, he was a Quaker. So I think it's time to put on our dancing shoes and do a little Quaking in the name of Daniel Leeds and Elvis. Can you imagine that pair on Ed Sullivan together? But but Daniel Leeds, he was a Quaker. He settled in West Jersey in the community of Burlington, like I'd mentioned, which was widely known as the epicenter of Quaker settlements in the British colonies. Thomas Leeds was Daniel's father, and Thomas was actually imprisoned for just simply being a Quaker. You know, the Society of Friends was not well liked or respected in Great Britain. So, you know, during the 1600s, the late 1600s there, he was imprisoned just for practicing his religion. So this, along with the general anti-Quaker sentiment amongst Puritans and Anglos, that was the catalyst for the Leeds family and their fellow Quakers to migrate to the colonies to begin with. I mentioned that Daniel was a notable figure in society. He was someone that he was as popular as you can be without widespread media. We're going to talk about the types of media that they had at their disposal to kind of keep up with the times, but it's not like it is today, obviously, with television and internet and cell phones and stuff. But one of the things that Daniel had above all else was an education, and he had a huge private library that rivaled the largest of libraries in the mid-Atlantic region of the time. Well-read, well-written, he was a savvy entrepreneur, and that private library, along with a lot of the letters and the official documents that were written by him that were considered notable, they've actually long since disappeared and were purposely destroyed in the aftermath of all of this very public and very vile feud with members of his community. So they almost like erased him from history because of all of this.
Yeah, the winning side tends to do that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
The winning side always writes the history. It's been speculated that if Leeds and the Quakers did not have a falling out, he quite possibly could have accumulated his writings and his works and all of that into a centralized library or university, and even had enough influence in the community to be considered on the level of the founding fathers of the U.S. Where this opinion comes from, I mean, it's obviously an opinion. I saw it referenced in a couple of different places. The general population didn't believe that, but there are some scholars that do believe that he could have been on that level of a founding father. But like most people who bear the Leeds name, you're going to see that it's literally a curse. And like most people who bear the name Leeds, Daniel would prove to be a cursed failure.
Oh.
Among other ideas considered to be taboo or abstract at the time, Daniel was one of the first colonists who actually embraced the idea of a heliocentric solar system. So in a time where people thought that the Earth was the center of our existence, they didn't understand the way celestial bodies worked. He was one that embraced that. He was cutting edge. And since he was an influential figure of sorts in his community, his ideology was considered dangerous in the minds of his contemporaries. So he wanted to bring enlightenment. He wanted to bring scientific revolution to the edge of the empire.
No wonder he got the axe.
Yep, exactly. Right? West Jersey at the time, it was considered, when he was living, to be the edge of the empire in the colonies here. So not only was he fringe in his ideas, he was literally fringe geographically as well. So it was easy for them to kind of take this guy and pigeonhole him and to condemn him. And it's a shame, because we talked a little bit earlier about how the Quakers were marginalized in their own right in their society, but here they are marginalizing this guy who's got different ideas.
Passing the buck, yeah.
So fellow Quakers, they resisted Leeds' fringe ideas, and he was even referred to as Satan's harbinger in printed material distributed by his rivals in the late 1600s. And I'll go into more detail about why this bit, being called Satan's harbinger, was such a heavy blow to the reputation of both the Leeds and his business and, just his entire family legacy. Those two words carried a lot of weight back then. It's not like today where, when I'm driving in traffic and I'm pissed off and I'm like, God damn you, Satan's harbinger,
Really say that?
It wouldn't surprise me if you did.
I mean, flipping of the bird is a little easier.
Yeah, you're right, I guess.
Oh, come on. We get that. That's like saying hello in New Jersey, and she's got to take it a step further.
I know. Yeah.
Well, it's not this. It wasn't the same in the 1600s. I'll tell you that. It went a much longer way. I would have gotten pulled over and beaten with a stick if I called a fellow driver Satan's harbinger in the 1600s.
Hmm.
Now that just happens if you call it Taylor ham.
Yeah, that's damn right. It's pork roll. Goddamn. We're gonna convert the doubters. We're gonna make this a completely pork roll state.
That's a beautiful dream, Vinny.
You know how like on the news channels when they have over election day, they turn the states, red or blue or green, I guess, if there's a very rare victory of an independent. We are going to have a map of the US somewhere. We're going to post it on Reddit or Discord or something. And for every state that we convert to pork roll, we're going to put a little pork roll on each state until
That's
it covers.
A beautiful dream, Vinny.
I think so.
That's the kind of America I want to live in.
Well, Daniel, we're talking about all his great ideas, but he didn't want to live in America at all. He wanted to continue the empire that was Great Britain. He was actually made counselor to Lord Cornbury, the first imperial governor of New Jersey. And imperial governors, they're a little bit different from the governors we know today. There was an assembly of about 24 members. They were equally divided by section, and they would rotate meetings between Perth Amboy and Burlington. So the governor of New York, Edward Hyde, he went by Lord Cornbury. He assumed office as the first New Jersey royal governor in 1703. So when that happened, Daniel was kind of on his side. He was on the side of the Empire of Great Britain. So between
Wait, this guy was given the title Lord Cornbury. He couldn't have asked for a better title. I mean, you're like.
Well, I mean, it's better than Lord Dingleberry.
That's true, but not by much.
Yeah, I mean, look, if we're talking about the oppression of peoples, and this guy was on the side of oppression, I don't mind calling him Lord Cornbury.
No, I was amazed that. I mean, that just kind of strikes me as the kind of name you're stuck with.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not something that you would voluntarily accept.
That's true. Well, it's kind of weird to say that Daniel had these fringe ideas that were obviously going in the right direction, but he still wanted to kind of keep, the mouth to the teat of the empire, if you will. So it's because of these points of view.
Forgive the pun, but better the devil you know than the devil you don't, right?
Yeah, I guess that was his way of thinking. And it wound up, really biting him in the ass at the end.
Costing him.
Oh, yeah. But his points of view on all things scientific that were against his religion and his role within the empirical hierarchy, the fellow Quakers and other colonists, they began to distrust the entire Leeds family. So with the term the Leeds Devil being the slur that was freely tossed around when you're insulting those who may not have been fully committed to the idea of independence from Great Britain. So it went from calling Daniel the Leeds Devil to his family, and then it started spreading. So say, the three of us are hanging out in a pub in Colonial, New Jersey, and Ange and I are talking about some stuff, and Alex comes in, and he's like, you know what, man? You guys and your independent thinking, it doesn't fly with me, man. I'm gonna stick with the king. Our insult to you would be, well, sure you would, you Leeds Devil, you Satan's harbinger, you. And it would send shock and awe throughout your body, and you would leave a disgraced man.
I mean, give me 3 beers and I'll leave a disgraced man. You don't have to do the work.
Oh, man. So in 1687, Leeds and William Bradford. Bradford, if you're a historian, you know he's one of the first recognized, if not the first recognized, colonial printer in North America. He took his printing press over from Mother Europe and took it to the colonies. They created an almanac together, which was intended to fuse Leeds's ideologies concerning astrology and his allegiance to the empire with a more structured government, and kind of fuse those together to kind of instill that in traditional Quaker practices and kind of combine them together. So Leeds and Bradford thought that their new almanac would be such a great success and welcomed by the community with open arms, but almost immediately upon publication, a swift and stern backlash occurred. You know, all the traditional Quakers, they didn't like it very much, to the extent that every copy of this almanac was ordered to be collected and destroyed by the elders in the Quaker community.
People fear change.
I mean, that's kind of like, you know, I guess if the Zombie Mafia started writing, I don't know, 80s electronic pop music. Do you think that the horror punk community...
you mean going the bad religion route?
Yeah, you know, would the horror punk community embrace that, or would they take all of Zombie Mafia CDs and burn them in a pile?
I'm going with option 2.
All right, yeah. I mean, it's true.
That would probably be the case.
And then, Ange, you know, like it's almost like if Dunkin' Donuts dropped the name Donuts, hint, hint, wink, wink, do you take all of their coffee cups and burn them in a pile, or do you just blindly follow suit and say, yeah, you know what, it's just Dunkin' now?
I mean, I wouldn't care, to be honest with you. I just feel like this whole thing is just, it's like, this is like the OG of cancel culture for back in the day.
Oh, totally.
You know what I mean? Like, people think that's a new thing. No, this is like going way, way back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, now they lose their career. Back in the day, they were burned at the stake.
Exactly. It's just a little bit more barbaric back then. But, you know, like you said, one person can say one thing and then it just catches, and I feel bad.
Well, you really, you hit the nail on the head. You know, they didn't have Twitter. So they weren't limited to 240 characters.
Right.
They had these almanacs. They had these pamphlets. And that was their means of social media. I mean, you know, we say the term social media, we think of going on our phones or going on a laptop and typing, you know, facebook.com or twitter.com or whatever. But really, it's a media, it's a form of communication that is social, that people, it's the popular form of keeping in touch with the pulse of society. And that's what they were doing back then. It's been something, like you said, Ange, it's been something that's gone way back. People were, you know, etching stuff on stone tablets before there was papyrus, and then when paper came into play, forget it. Like, people started putting all kinds of shit on there, and like Alex said, it's always the victor who enjoys the spoils, and a lot of times those spoils come with writing the history. So that's what happened in this case. In the face of all the scrutiny, Leeds decided, hey, maybe I wasn't clear enough in my initial publication. Maybe these elders and my fellow villagers and society members, they didn't understand what I'm trying to say. So instead of, you know, quietly doing something else, he just promptly doubles down and decides, you know, this almanac wasn't enough. I'm going to write a book. Yeah, I'm going to write an entire book about...
If at first you don't succeed,
write a book.
Throw your family name into ruin.
And so he took all of his fringe ideas, all of his siding with the empire, and he put it into this book called The Temple of Wisdom. And as you probably guessed, this book was also met with vitriol by the Society of Friends, known as the Quakers, and, you know, even more so than the almanac itself. So just like the previous publication, every copy of this book that was also published and distributed in mass by William Bradford, the printer, and Daniel Leeds, was rounded up and destroyed. I say every copy. There were a couple of copies that survived this purging. There's actually a remaining copy of the Temple of Wisdom, and it exists in the custody of the Pennsylvania Historic Society. So I think that's pretty cool. I actually, I meant to do it before we recorded this episode, but I wanted to see if this book was like on display in a museum or if they have it like kind of in their private record or private gallery. I would love to take a look at this thing just for the sheer historic significance of it.
It's like the Ark and the Covenant at the end of Raiders. It's being studied by top men.
Top men put into a wooden box and put into a warehouse. So this fallout sees Leeds renounce his membership of the Society of Friends. I mean, I think that was, we all saw that coming. And he makes it his life's mission, according to Regal in his book, and he became a political attack dog of sorts. So, like I said, he doubles and triples and quadruples down, and he becomes an ally for the Empire fighting against the rebellious Quakers, and in turn, the rebellious colonies. You know, he not only becomes an enemy in the Quakers' eyes, he becomes an enemy of everyone who wanted liberty from England. So then Leeds, he writes more books, he writes more pamphlets and almanacs, and he drags the Quakers through the mud. I don't know if Ange, I tried the wrestling reference with you earlier, but it was a little before your time. But did you know Eddie Guerrero at least?
Of course.
He lies, he cheats, he steals. Well, basically Daniel Leeds was saying that the Quakers were the Eddie Guerreros of the colonies, and they were savages for trying to run around naked all the time, and degenerates because they didn't pay their bills, and all this crazy kind of stuff. Some of it, you know, might have been rooted in a little bit of truth or embellished some of the truth, but all in all, it was just a means for him. You know, even though he was being blackballed at the time, his publications were still widely read. So, you know, you had these fringe groups who were hanging on every word that he said. So even though the Quakers are, you know, kind of shunning him from their society, he's got these people who are following along, and it winds up leading to the downfall of the Quakers. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Basically, at this point, you know, you have Daniel Leeds. He's drawn the line in the sand, and people are calling him the Leeds Devil. And it's this, like I said, it's this political demon, this political animal that is almost an enemy of the public. So this guy named...
Always with the politics.
That's right. It always, you can always boil it down to politics, man. And it's no different here. So this guy named Caleb Pusey? Is it like Gary Busey, but Pusey? I don't know. I don't want to judge the guy on his name. I mean, like, we already talked about Lord Cornbury. Well, anyway, Caleb, he was renowned as a Quaker apologist, and he starts publishing his own books aimed at discrediting and blackballing Leeds in the eyes of the colony. So he saw that these fringe groups, they were gaining some momentum. He still has, you know, Leeds had a big readership. So Caleb Pusey's like, you know what? I'm going to be on the right side of history here. I'm going to start going at this guy. And it was literally like, Pusey put his own line in the sand, and all exaggeration aside, lifelong bitter enemies were forged when Pusey wrote in his own published work that Leeds was, quote, Satan's harbinger, end quote, like I said earlier. Which back then in that world, amongst that community, living with that particular belief system, being accused of rubbing elbows with the devil himself was as bad as a death sentence. You might as well have just, you know, it was worse than walking around with the scarlet letter A sewn onto your dress, you know, back in the Puritan days, and being known as, you know, the devil's spawn that walks amongst the community. So long story short, Daniel Leeds made a deal with the devil, pun very much intended, and he sided with the empirical Anglos and Puritans, and he set on destroying the Quaker way of life in the colonies. Leeds' allegiance would prove to be beneficial in the short term, but as Quakers were all but run out of their communities and removed from positions of influence, that black mark remained on his name, and the Leeds Devil would curse he and his family forever. So Leeds himself, Daniel, passed away in the 1710s, but before he did, he passed his business of almanacs and pamphlets, which is still going strong, and he was still trolling those Quakers. He passed it along to his son Titan, and we'll go a little bit into the history of Titan Leeds here. So kind of just to summarize Daniel and his, I guess, his crusade, which failed ultimately. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, and how would you see yourself handling something like that?
I don't even know where to begin.
I mean, the only thing I can attribute it to from being from New England is this is very much how I learned about like the Salem witch trials and about complete hysteria from things that could have been easily simply something that was maybe a medical condition back in the day, but like they didn't give anybody any opportunities. Anything that was against what was going on in that society, it was law, and there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, I went to the Salem Witch Museum on a field trip when I was, I don't know, maybe in high school.
Yeah, I did that too.
Yeah, not like it like traumatized me, but I mean, it's just, you're a teenager and you're like, these girls were probably my age and they just
Or
were burned at
younger.
the stake, or younger. And they were just burned at the stake for, having a little hysteria, which could have been a little bit of PMS. Like I would have been screwed, I would have been like, damn, they're going to think I'm a crazy person, because I'm a little bit of PMS, so.
If it makes you feel any better, I would have been screwed too, because I've been accused of having male PMS, but I digress.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it happens. And like we were talking about, that creature, how it looked like deformed, and it could have easily been explained, and the oddity conversation that we had. And if you fast forward now and you can dive deep into the history of the Salem witch trials, it can easily be explained as, like I said, a medical condition, because there wasn't a lot of research back then. There wasn't a lot of medical. I don't even, they probably one doctor in the village, you know what I mean? And I'm sure that they weren't very educated. So
She can do math. She's a witch. Burn her.
Well, right. So anything like Vinny said, anything you go against the grain, you're just completely canceled. And it was worse. Like if people think it's bad now, it was worse back then. You didn't get a lot of opportunities. They actually did a whole thing, like a real life skit at the museum of like a trial. And I mean, it was literally like, oh, do you think that, do you denounce, Satan and you were a witch? And the lady says no, and they still burn her anyway, because like they have the people in the community like, oh, well, we saw her do this and we saw her do that, which it probably 98% of it wasn't true, but you wanted to make it so it was true. So it was.
Look at the rock in the water test. You put a quote unquote witch in the water.
Right.
And you drop a giant friggin' rock on her, and if she floats, she's a witch.
Exactly.
If it crushes her and she drowns, she's innocent. Hooray! I mean, the fact that she's dead doesn't really matter. She's innocent, but still dead.
Right. And it's kind of like, oh, what do you be like? Oh, my bad. Like, can't like,
everybody
get her
slowly
back in,
backs away from the pond,
right.
And
they didn't like learn their lesson from it, obviously, because they held every woman to the same standards. If you had XYZ symptoms, then you were automatically a witch, and that you couldn't convince them otherwise. So this is kind of what it reminds me of when you were telling the story about Daniel Leeds, is like that's what it was. No matter how much he did and how much proof that he thought he had, he didn't really have any backing.
Yeah. And it just sounds like something they could have just got together and talked about,
Right.
Dude was seriously book smart, but as is something I have seen, no matter what era, just because you can be absolutely brilliant with book smarts, that doesn't necessarily mean you have street smarts. And what I mean by that in this case is, if I was in Daniel Leeds' shoes, I would hope I'd be smart enough to read a room or maybe realize who my audience is. Daniel Leeds was sitting pretty. He had his fancy library. He could have been a major contender, but
you could have been a contender.
He couldn't read the room. He couldn't keep his mouth shut.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, and he found himself on the wrong side of history.
Yeah.
It didn't help.
He zigged when he should have zagged.
Yep.
But that's in history in general, because anybody who presents something that's scary or different or something that is completely out of this world, people panic.
Yes.
And back in the day, like I said, it caused mass hysteria to the point that, you were either exiled or killed for your beliefs and your ideas and everything else.
Daniel knew this, and he still pressed it.
Right.
Again, book smarts versus common sense.
Read the room, Leeds.
Yeah.
Read the room.
Hashtag t-shirt idea.
It's like that Futurama episode where Farnsworth is explaining that lava is hot. Lava, hot. Don't jump in it.
And you melt your entire family legacy away. Well,
Yeah, pretty much.
he does that by passing it along to his son Titan. You know, the sins of the father, I guess. We talked about how this literally destroyed their entire family legacy, and a lot of it is because of the fact that he passed his, I guess if you want to call it, his printing empire onto his son Titan. But it wasn't just, the profitable almanacs and books and pamphlets that he was printing. It was also the ideologies that he was passing along. So Titan, he continues to print the Leeds Almanac after his father's passing. And despite all the drama with the Quakers, the Leeds Almanac, it was still a thriving success and it eventually became the #1 almanac in West and East Jersey. It was, I've seen some refer to it almost like if a person picks up a tabloid in the supermarket, that's kind of what this was. So a lot of people would pick this up because it was readily available and it was something for them to read and to interact with. But it didn't always necessarily mean that they agreed with what was printed inside. It was a form of entertainment for them.
So it was a tabloid.
Yeah, pretty much. At least in some people's eyes, in some historians' eyes. But Titan found himself up against a competitor, a man known as a founding father of the United States of America, a man who was as shrewd as he was let's face it, he was a bit of a whore. And I say that, history will prove this if you look into him a little bit. But he was a brilliant man, a man of society. We know this man as Mr. Benjamin Franklin. So yeah, one of the heavy hitters, one of the founding fathers of the U.S., was a direct competitor to Titan Leeds. Franklin not only wanted a piece of that very lucrative almanac pie, because like I said, it was pretty much the only business in town at that point, and it was very lucrative. But he wanted the whole damn cobbler. He wanted the whole apple pie. So what did he do? Being the Mac Daddy that he was, he employed what Eazy-E Eric Bischoff would call the controversy creates cash tactic. And Ben Franklin took it upon himself to print every last bit of underhanded and sometimes even overtly overhanded vitriol against Titan Leeds and his dead dad in Franklin's new publication. You may have heard of it, Poor Richard's Almanac. So Franklin, he actually, at this time, he was writing under a pseudonym, Richard Saunders. And you'll actually see that he did this pretty often throughout his life. He would write under pseudonyms. What is the do-good letters? He wrote into like editorial papers as do-good, I think was the name. He pretended as a teenager or early 20s young gentleman, he pretended to be like a 60 or 70-year-old woman giving his opinions. But that's how he rolled. He took his level of trolling one step, or I may even venture saying several steps beyond his predecessor in causing grief for the Leeds family. So his predecessor being Caleb Pusey, he took it a step beyond that and legit publishes a prediction that Titan Leeds would die on October 17th, 1733. So that's right. Before celebrity death hoaxes were a thing on the internet, good old Benny Franklin was doing it way back in the 1730s. So like Ange said, it's, for as much has changed, more has stayed the same.
Mm-hmm.
Classy guy.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
All about that controversy creating cash. Obviously, Titan, he didn't take too kindly to Benny Boy mockingly using astrology. That's what he did. So the Leeds were known for their beliefs in astrology. Well, Ben Franklin used that against them, and he pretended to use astrology to make this bold prediction about Titan's death. So Titan insisted to his readers that Saunders, in this case, it was the pseudonym, or Franklin, in reality is a liar, and that Titan is still very much alive and well, and absolutely will not tolerate such ridiculous slander. But with each of Titan's responses, Franklin himself doubles down, and at one point even insisting that he was a personal friend of Titan's. So Ben says, hey, I'm a friend of Titan Leeds, and that Titan that I know, he would never speak in such an ill manner about me. Therefore, the person who's writing all of these rude responses in the Leeds Almanac, it must be the ghost of Titan Leeds. Obviously, this back and forth caught the public's attention. And it was the first kind of public battle in the media, in social media at the time. And sales of Poor Richard's Almanac soar. And think about it. Have you ever heard of the Leeds Almanac before today?
No.
No. I didn't. I didn't know about it until I started looking into this. But guess what? What do we learn when we're learning our history in school?
We're learning what the winners want us to know.
Exactly, which is Poor Richard's Almanac. So therefore, it made that battle between Ben Franklin and Titan Leeds the final nail in the coffin of the Leeds family reputation. So, you might be asking yourself at this point, so how did this political animal, how did all of the stuff that we just talked about, which was a political demon or a political animal that was known as the Leeds Devil, how did that morph into what we know as the Jersey Devil? And that's where this gets really fun. So while those two entities, the Leeds Devil, that was basically an awful political nickname for Daniel Leeds, and the monster we know today as the Jersey Devil, while these two entities are entirely separate, word-of-mouth campfire tales, local myths circulating around what was once West Jersey and the Pine Barrens, kind of that whisper down the lane sentiment, basically merged the tall tales of monsters in the woods with the namesake, the Jersey Devil. So I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of backstory of how these two ideas and ideologies might have morphed together. Back in the 1840s, this is quite some time after the Leeds family has been, their reputation has been crushed into oblivion. An author traveling through the Pine Barrens, documenting the life of what are known as Pineys. Unfortunately, they're so
That's respectful.
they're so lovingly called this even today. I've heard myself, growing up in South Jersey, you hear the term piney, and it's I don't know if anybody who will be listening to the show live in the Pine Barrens and maybe even been called this, but it's a really derogatory term. But this author was going through the Pine Barrens, documenting the life of a piney, and the author winds up meeting a woman named Hannah Butler, who told her the story of the Leeds monster. That's what she had called it. So this author takes this story of Hannah Butler and embellishes it into a mystical tale about a monstrous beast known as the Jersey Devil. So this begs the question, does something actually haunt the Pine Barrens of New Jersey? If it wound up just being, was it the memory of Daniel Leeds and his political demon? Or does something actually haunt and stalk and prey on the people of the Pine Barrens? And that's what we'll tackle in the next episode of Geek Out Down the Rabbit Hole, the second part of our Creepy Cryptids series on the Jersey Devil.
The Jersey Devil?
The Jersey Devil. If I can get my tongue out of the way. But I do want to give a big shout out to those authors I had mentioned earlier, Dr. Brian Regal and Frank J. Esposito. They're the authors of The Secret History of the Jersey Devil, How Quakers, Hucksters, and Benjamin Franklin Created a Monster. That's the book that I picked up over on Amazon. I would highly recommend checking it out.
Good title.
Yeah, it's a mouthful too. And apparently, I forgot to mention this earlier. When they would go back and forth with these pamphlets, a lot of the times, because they were more like tabloids, and even though when people couldn't afford to buy them, they would see them and they would read the title at least. So a lot of times they would put their disses with one another in the title itself. So the title wound up being like a 50-word long title of this pamphlet, just saying, Daniel Leeds is a piece of crap and you should never listen to him and he sucks and he's stupid. And that would be the title of the pamphlet. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but...
I mean, not necessarily catchy, but it does get the point across.
Right.
So clickbait before there was clickbait.
Exactly. For everything that changes, more stays the same. We talked about that. But this book, The Secret History of the Jersey Devil, along with all of its references, it paints a very clear historical picture of the origins of the moniker or the namesake of the Jersey Devil that we all talk about today. So Brian Regal, he's a Keene University associate professor, and he actually encourages those interested in the subject to find him on his Keene University webpage. He's written articles on this topic, on the topics of his sources, and he even posted his email there. So, search for Dr. Regal at Keene University.
Wonder if I could track him down. My folks live by Keene.
Yeah, there you go. We can do a follow-up with him. Maybe have him on. That would be pretty cool. I also want to give a shout out to History Channel's Monster Quest, the episode Terrifying Devil discovered in New Jersey. It was on season 3, episode 4. Especially the narrator of this series, Stan Bernard. He has a really stellar spooky narrator voice. So if you ever just want to hear about a spooky tale and have a cool voice tell it to you, go check him out. Because that episode looked into a particular family's encounter, what they believe to be the Jersey Devil, and we'll kind of go into that in the next episode. And I wouldn't normally recommend anything from the History Channel if you want to take a subject seriously. They've kind of lost their own reputation.
The shark?
Jump the shark is one way of putting it. They call themselves the History Channel today, but I mean, let's be honest, it's more of a form of entertainment than anything else. You know, they have all their over-the-top dramatizations and that unnecessary eerie music, you know, over these, you know.
I mean, eerie music is always necessary in my mind, but...
It is, but when, like, you're describing what you had for breakfast, and it's like, and I poured the bowl of cereal into a ceramic bowl, and the bran flakes spattered across the sides of the bowl, and then I poured my oat milk over top of it. And then there's this like creepy weird music behind it. It kind of takes away from the effect of, you know, when something creepy actually happens, you're desensitized and you're like, all right, I just, you know, you wanted me to get creeped out about your cereal this morning. I'm not going to really buy into what you're saying about UFOs and shit. But anyway, I watch it to be entertained. It is very entertaining. And they do give little morsels and details about the paranormal side of this particular story. So I feel like it definitely whets the appetite before diving deep into, you know, any historical thing. So definitely check it out. But yeah, before we wrap up this episode, is there anything else that you guys wanted to add before we get spooky next week?
I mean, we've covered the logical, rational, reasonable aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Bring on the conspiracy theories.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what we're all about. Yeah, I love the idea of just of seeing as many sides of something as possible.
Oh, one thing that we didn't mention that I, in order to be air quotes prepared for this episode, I did a little reading of my own, and I discovered that coincidentally, the description of the Jersey Devil as the man bear pig thing. With the like head of a goat and wings and all this other crazy stuff was actually on the Leeds Family press.
Oh, you are right. I do remember seeing that. That's a good catch by you.
I have my moments.
And it is for that moment alone that we appreciate you being a part of Geek Out Down the Rabbit Hole, Alex. So we're gonna wrap it up. We're gonna get spooky. We're gonna get creepy next time. We're gonna tell all kinds of scary tales and kind of see. You know, I'm gonna give you a little bit of a spoiler alert here. You're gonna find out that this entity, this demonic entity, it did not start with the Leeds family. It's actually been around a lot longer than that. And the fact that this thing, this being, this entity might actually exist out in the Pine Barrens, for as much of a case as we could make that it was, you know, logically brought to life with this political animal of sorts, there can also be a case that there's something otherworldly out there. So I'm excited to dive into that. I'm excited to tell stories. I have my own Pine Barren stories. I don't know if you do, Alex, you know, with being a Jersey guy yourself.
I mean, just passing through and wanting to get the hell out.
It kind of invokes that feeling, but we're going to talk about that.
It does.
We're going to talk about that next week. So until next time, thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you later.